Hello, YouTube. I am Shaggy. I am Philalitea, and we are returned to the Phaedrus. We're going to read some more Phaedrus, and we're just going to pick up right on the page that I left off from, like we remember what we were reading from before. Socrates says, first, there must be an analysis of the soul. No, he doesn't, because the editor does those stupid sentences for some reason to tell me what the coming paragraph is about, because what I don't want to do is read the paragraph. I hate that shit. Anyway, Socrates says, then consider what truth as well as Hippocrates says about this or about any other nature. Ought we not to consider first whether that which we wish to learn and to teach is a simple or multiform thing? And if simple, then to inquire what power it has of acting or being acted upon in relation to other things. And if multiform, then to number the forms and see first in the case of one of them, and then in the case of all of them, what is that power of acting or being acted upon, which makes each and all of them to be what they are. To which Phaedrus says, you may very likely be right, Socrates. And Socrates says, the method which proceeds without analysis is like the groping of a blind man. Yet, surely, he who is an artist ought not to admit of a comparison with the blind or deaf. The rhetorician, who teaches his pupil to speak scientifically, will particularly set forth the nature of that being to which he addresses his speeches, and this I conceive to be the soul. Phaedrus says, certainly. Socrates continues, his whole effort is directed to the soul, for in that he seeks to produce conviction. Yes, Phaedrus agrees. Then clearly, Socrates continues, Thrasymachus or anyone else who teaches rhetoric in earnest will give an exact description of the nature of the soul, which will enable us to see whether she be single, same, or like the body multiform. That is what we should call showing the nature of the soul. Phaedrus says, exactly. Then the rhetorician must show by what means the soul affects or is affected, and why one soul in one way and another in another. He will explain, secondly, the mode in which she acts or is acted upon. Socrates says, true. Phaedrus agrees. Thirdly, having classified men and speeches and their kinds and affections, and adapted them to one another, he will tell the reasons of his arrangement and show why one soul is persuaded by a particular form of argument and another not. Phaedrus says, you have hit upon a very good way. Socrates continues, yes, that is the true and only way in which any subject can be set forth or treated by rules of art, whether in speaking or writing. But the writers of the present day, at whose feet you have sat, craftily conceal the nature of the soul which they know quite well. Nor, until they adopt our method of reading and writing, can we admit that they write by rules of art. What is our method? Phaedrus asks. Socrates says, I cannot give you the exact details, but I should like to tell you generally, as far as is in my power, how a man ought to proceed according to rules of art. Phaedrus says, well, let me hear. Socrates explains, oratory is the art of enchanting the soul, and therefore the orator must learn the differences of human souls by reflecting and experience. That's a subtitle by the editor. He says, oratory is the art of enchanting the soul, and therefore he who would be an orator has to learn the differences of human souls. There are so many and of such nature, and from them come the differences between man and man. Having proceeded thus far in his analysis, he will next divide speeches into their different classes. What? Okay. Such and such persons, he will say, are affected by this or that kind of speech in this or that way. And he will tell you why. The pupil must have a theoretical notion of them first, and then he must have experience of them in actual life, and be able to follow them with all his senses about him, or he will never get beyond the precepts of his masters. This is why I don't like when editors interject themselves into a text like this, with those first two sentences of this part of Plato's dialogue, A, being put after Socrates, when they're actually an editor insert, confuse everything. When Socrates starts talking about he's, that could be the editor interjecting that he's talking about Socrates. Anyway, the pupil must have a good theoretical notion of them first, and then he must have experience of them in actual life and be able to follow them with all his senses about him, or he will never get beyond the precepts of his masters. But when he understands what persons are persuaded by what arguments, and sees the person about whom he was speaking in the abstract actually before him, and knows that it is he, and can say to himself, this is the man or this is the character who ought to have a certain argument applied to him in order to convince him of a certain opinion, he who knows all this, and knows also when he should speak, and when he should refrain, and when he should use pithy sayings, pathetic appeals, sensational effects, and all the other modes of speech which he has learned. When, I say, he knows the times and seasons of all these things, then and not till then he is a perfect master of his art. But if he fail in any of these points, whether in speaking or teaching or writing them, and yet declares that he speaks by rules of art, he who says, I don't believe you, has the better of him. That's what you'll notice, that I do this in my lives all the time. Whenever people come at me with information, I say, no, you cannot have mod. I say, I don't believe you, all the time. All the time. That's how I respond to that kind of behavior. I can almost see my chat, but I have to turn it back off because I can only almost see it. Well, the teacher will say, is this, Phaedrus and Socrates, your account of the so-called art of rhetoric, or am I to look for another? And Phaedrus says, he must take this, Socrates, for there is no possibility of another, and yet the creation of such an art is not easy. Very true, Socrates agrees, and therefore let us consider this matter in every light and see whether we cannot find a shorter and easier road. There is no use in taking a long, rough, roundabout way if there be a shorter and easier one. And I wish that you would try and remember whether you have heard from Lysias or anyone else anything which might be of any service to us. Phaedrus says, if trying would avail, then I might, but at the moment I can think of nothing. Socrates continues, suppose I tell you something which somebody who knows told me. Certainly, Phaedrus agrees. May not the wolf, Socrates asks, as the proverbs say, claim a hearing? I don't know what that means. Do you say what can be said? Do you say what can be said for him? Phaedrus says, and Socrates says, but the wolf says that in courts of law no one cares about truth. He will argue that there is no point in putting a solemn face on these matters, or in going round and round until you arrive at first principles. For, as I said, at first, when the question is of justice and good, or is a question in which men are concerned who are just and good, either by nature or habit, he who would be a skilled rhetorician has no need of truth, for that in courts of law men literally care nothing about truth, but only about conviction. And this is based on probability, to which he who would be a skilled orator should therefore give his whole attention. And they say also that there are cases in which the actual facts, if they are improbable, ought to be withheld, and only the probability should be told either in accusation or defense, and that always in speaking the orator should keep probability in view and say goodbye to the truth. And the observance of this principle throughout a speech furnishes the whole art. You ever listen to a political speech? They begin at a lie. Well, okay. So I have to say a lie. That's where speeches begin. That's where orators, professional orators begin. That's where lawyers begin. If a lawyer is trying to get you off for a crime that you committed, he's lying. He's beginning at trying to convince someone of something that isn't true. So the first place that they go is to say, okay, well, there is no divine truth. There is no divine truth. There is only the relative truth of what I can get people to believe. Which is horrible. But also, first principles. This is why I'm always talking about first principles. And when people come at me and want to argue philosophy with me and they've got their first principles mixed up, they don't even know what first principles are. They don't even know what a principle is within an argument. This is what I'm talking about. If you want to be smart and you want to be not taken advantage of and you want to know how to vote or on whom to vote or whom to follow, or you want to be a leader, the first thing you have to be able to do is identify principles. First thing you have to do is you have to be able to identify the principle from which the argument that you're hearing is coming from. You have to be able to reduce it down to its lowest common denominator. You listen to me do that all the time. If you're watching my work, and you're reading me and you're hearing me talk, I'm doing it all the time. Principle. It's about the principle of the thing. You'll hear me say that a lot. Phaedrus responds to this. That is what the professors of rhetoric do actually say, Socrates. I have not forgotten that we have quite briefly touched upon this matter already. With them, the point is all important. And Socrates says, I dare say that you are familiar with Tisias. Does he not define probability to be that which the many think? And Phaedrus says, certainly he does. So if something is probable, then many people think that it is. He's not talking about likelihood. He's talking about whether something is probable to be real, because, and Tisias uses the example that, or Tisias defines probability as generality, what's generally believed to be true. And Socrates says, according to Tisias, either party should tell a lie of a sort which the other would be unwilling or unable to refute. And this is what Democrats and Republicans are still doing to this day. They're lying about ways and ways that the other party can't refute. This is where I was talking at the end of my last stream about the sexual assault claims that are being levied right now at Maynard James Keenan and whether they're true or untrue. This is where they come from. You make accusations about somebody that they can't refute, and then the way you refute that accusation is by making an accusation of that person that they can't refute. So what happens is somebody accuses you of sexual assault, and then you accuse them of just grossly lying, of making it up. And then even if the interaction that happened between you that led to the claim was consensual, that's irrelevant now, because you're both refuting lies that are irrefutable. And so Socrates continues, I believe that he has a clever and ingenious case of this sort. He supposes a feeble and valiant man to have assaulted a strong and cowardly one, and to have robbed him of his coat or of something other. He is brought into court, and then Tisias says that both parties should tell lies. The coward should say that he was assaulted by more men than one. The other should prove that they were alone, and should argue thus. How could a weak man like me have assaulted a strong man like him? The complainant will not like to confess his own cowardice, and will therefore invent some other lie, which his adversary will thus gain an opportunity of refuting. And there are other devices of the same kind which have a place in the system. Am I not right, Phaedrus? Have you ever been in court? Have you ever been in civil court? Have you ever been involved in a divorce case? Have you ever been involved in a divorce? Have you ever been involved in a breakup? Really, I'm serious. This right here, what he's talking about, this is our lives. This is what our lives are. And he was calling it out and saying, we need to stop doing this 2,500 years ago or something like that. And because he wrote it down, people who read for shit think that he's endorsing it. So this is just what life is now. Phaedrus says, certainly, you are right about this. And Socrates continues, bless me, what a wonderfully mysterious art is this which Tisias or some other gentleman, in whatever name or country he rejoices, has discovered. Shall we say a word to him or not? Phaedrus says, what shall we say to him? And Socrates responds, let us tell him that, before he appeared, you and I were saying that the probability of which he speaks was engendered in the minds of the many by the likeness of the truth, and that we had just been affirming that he who knew the truth would always know the best how to discover the resemblances of the truth. If he has anything else to say about the art of speaking, we should like to hear him. But if not, we are satisfied with our own view that unless a man estimates the various characters of his hearers and is able to divide all things into classes and to comprehend them under single ideas, he will never be a skillful rhetorician, even within the limits of a human power. And so this is why I go live in the manner that I do, is because I'm a skillful rhetorician. And this skill he will not attain without a great deal of trouble, which a good man ought to undergo, not for the sake of speaking and acting before men, but in order that he may be able to say what is acceptable to God, and always to act acceptably to him as far as in him lies. That's why I say I'm a religious person, speaking what is acceptable to God, talking about what's unacceptable to God as well. I spent a lot of time talking about what's unacceptable behavior and living my life to the best of my ability to be acceptable to him, which is why I say that I am fully of the opinion that my utterly ruined pelvis is about something that God is upset with me for, that I'm doing that is unacceptable to him. And it's probably just masturbation. It's probably just that simple. And with this skill he will not attain without a great deal of trouble, which a good man ought to undergo, not for the sake of speaking and acting before men, but in order that he may be able to say what is acceptable to God, and always to act acceptably to him as far as in him lies. For there is a saying of wiser men than ourselves, that a man of sense should not try to please his fellow servants. At least this should not be his first object, but his good and noble masters. And therefore, if the way is long and circuitous, marvel not at this. For where the end is great, there we may take the longer road, but not for lesser ends such as yours. And so what he's saying here is that employees, wage slaves, can't entertain one another. So this whole YouTube, somebody on YouTube told me that the way you're supposed to become a YouTuber and the way you're supposed to be an entertainer is that you have a dead-end job that pays for everything in your life, and then you go on YouTube and bitch about that until people make you rich enough that you can quit. And it's like, nope. The working class cannot entertain the working class. Johnny Depp doesn't go to work at McDonald's. You have to take the time to be good at what you're doing. These people, these bedroom philosophers, right? Bedroom entertainers, bedroom guitarists, bedroom bassists, bedroom singers. All of these people are in a closed, controlled environment that allows them to pretend to be better than what they are. But get them live and they fall to pieces. Davey 504 isn't exactly selling out venues, because that live show was bad. He was bad live. It tanked his career. There's a reason that Bradley Hall isn't putting videos of his band on his channel. There's a reason. It's bad. They're not good. And there's a reason that Uncle Ben Keller doesn't rely on his channel for his primary source of income. His bands are actually good. You see the difference? Truly, the argument may say, Tisius, that if you do not mind going so far, rhetoric has a fair beginning here. Phaedrus says, I think, Socrates, that this is admirable, if only practicable. What I'm saying is that I'm better. What's that Eminem line? Half of you critics out there can't even stomach me, stomach me, let alone stand me. It's like I'm so good at this thing that I'm doing, the rhetoric, the philosophy, the standing in public and talking about virtue, talking about higher ideals, talking about higher thought, talking about history and psychology and all of these things. I've been talking about these things as a working class people, talking to other working class people for so long without being elevated from among you, that I've chosen to lower myself as far below you as possible. So now I'm speaking up to all of you, which is what he describes. He says, a man of sense, a man of reason, a man of experience, a man of intellectual wealth and taste should not try to please his fellow servants. It didn't do me any good to be this person that I am with a counter in front of me. Didn't make any sense. I have to be serving my good and noble masters. And I can promise you that you're going to meet very few of those. Fewer than 1% of the people you will meet in your life. An entire career of working table service, working retail, working hospitality. You're going to spend less than 1% of the people that you engage with. Fewer than 1% of those people are going to be true and noble masters. The rest of them are all going to be fellow slaves, just like you, wage slaves. This guy walking into the Panera right now, gray hair, carrying his laptop, got his backpack, got his fucking polo shirt on and his overtight, what's that brand? Dockers, right? That guy's not better than me. You know how I know he's not better than I am? Because he's a gray hair and he's still going to work. He still has to work from a Panera just like a college student, 40 years after he graduated university. It's a dead end trying to please your class. Why? Because you can't please your class and get a material reward for it. Only righteous and noble masters, like he says, good and noble masters, because they know how to divvy out the rewards. Well, who's the most good and the most noble master? God. We skip the human and go right to God. Men of sense do. Men of sense do. Men of sense don't give a fuck what you, other human beings, think about him. Why? Because you're senseless. Phaedrus says, I think, Socrates, that this is admirable, if only practicable. Socrates says, but even to fail in an honorable object is admirable, or is honorable. So to try to live an honorable life and still fail is still honorable, because you made the effort. You made the effort. Socrates continues, enough appears to have been said by us of a true and false art of speaking. So Phaedrus agrees, and Socrates continues, but there is something yet to be said of propriety and impropriety in writing. And Socrates asks, do you know how you can speak or act about rhetoric in a manner which will be acceptable to God? And Phaedrus says, no, indeed. Do you? I have heard, Socrates says, a tradition of the ancients. Whether true or not, they only know. Although if we had found the truth ourselves, do you think that we should care much about the opinions of men? And Phaedrus says, your question needs no answer. But I wish that you would tell me what you say that you have heard. And Socrates says, at the Egyptian city of Naucratis, there was a famous old god whose name was Thuth. That is, Thoth. The bird, which is called the ibis, is sacred to him, and he was the inventor of many arts, such as arithmetic and calculation and geometry and astronomy and droughts and dice. But his great discovery was the use of letters. Now in those days the god Tammuz was the king of the whole country of Egypt, and he dwelt in the great city of Upper Egypt, which the Hellenes call Egyptian Thebes, and the god himself is called by them Ammon. To him came Thuth and showed his inventions, desiring that the other Egyptians might be allowed to have the benefit of them. He enumerated them, and Tammuz inquired about their several uses and praised some of them and censured others as he was approved or disapproved of them. It would take a long time to repeat all that Tammuz said to Tut. His name is actually like Tut, because that TH, like Tammuz, is just the T, then there's the aspiration, but they don't have the th sound. It's not Thamus and Thuth, it's Tammuz and Tut. And if you, I think the reason this editor spells Thoth EU instead of with the O is because if you pronounce it properly, Thoth's name sounds like taught, like to teach, to be taught in English, which is coincidence? I actually don't know. Linguists will probably insist that it's a coincidence. But is it? I don't know. Probably. But when they came to letters, this, said Tut, will make the Egyptians wiser and give them better memories. It is a specific, both for the memory and for the wit, Tamus replied. Oh, most ingenious Tut. The parent or inventor of an art is not always the best judge of the utility or inutility of his own inventions to the users of them. We know this is true. We know this is true, right? How many things in the modern world were invented for this thing, and then millennials and later generations said, okay, well, that's dumb. Our parents bought us this thing. We're using it for this. How many? Think about it. And in this instance, continues Tammuz through Socrates' mouth, you who are the father of letters, from a paternal love of your own children, have been led to attribute them a quality which they cannot have. For this discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls, because they will not use their memories. They will trust to the external written characters and not remember of themselves. The specific which you have discovered is an aid not to memory, but to reminiscence. And you give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. Who remembers 2008 very well? Who remembers the advent of smartphones? Who remembers the conversations that everybody used to have? Everybody. I can think of a very specific moment where I had this conversation. But who can remember the conversations that everybody had when smartphones were just beginning to be ubiquitous and people were reminiscing about the old times and trying to remember the name of a song or trying to remember the name of a movie, and then somebody in the group pulls out their phone and Googles it and has the answer, and then somebody else goes in the group goes, we don't remember anything anymore because we don't have to because of Google. Who remembers that? Who remembers? Because that happened every day. In 2009, that happened. Every day that happened. I worked with a chick who said that every day about the ubiquity of phones. Every time somebody would pull out their phone to Google trivia, she would be like, oh, we don't remember anything important anymore. They will be hearers, continues Tammuz, prophesying through Socrates. And remember, he says that he heard this about a people that's so long dead that there's no way of confirming that this conversation happened between these gods or that the Egyptians believed this. So this might be made up by Plato. Anyway, for the purposes of allegory. Because what you don't understand is that the Greeks used allegory and they didn't have any problem. Cognitively understanding and invented allegory. But they were the only people for a long time. When the Christians decided, okay, we're going to allow allegory, and when the Jews decided they were going to allow allegorical interpretations of the Bible, that was the first time. Jesus and his allegories are the first time among Semitics that allegory was used. This, what Plato is doing, is innovative, and he knows it, and he's being ironic as he says this, because even as he's discussing, because actually the Greeks didn't use characters or letters, this is an anachronism. This is an anachronism, because remember, they used the pictograms, they used hieroglyphs. Those weren't letters. Those weren't characters. We've had this conversation alive because a guy wanted to get at me about how our letters are symbols, and they're not, but the hieroglyphs were. But you know who wouldn't know that? You know who wouldn't know that? Everyone in the 5th century. That language, nobody could read those hieroglyphs anymore. Nobody had been able to read those hieroglyphs for hundreds of years. And that's what Plato is talking about here. Sure, you can write them down and people will remember them, because the people that can read them will remember them, but everybody else who can't read them won't remember because they won't ever have known. And then when the people who can read them die, everyone forgets forever. The Indus Valley civilization is experiencing this right now. If a long extinct civilization can experience a phenomenon, the Indus Valley civilization is experiencing this. We have a huge collection of their literature, and you know what we can do with none of it? Read it. We can't read a single word of it. Not even a single letter do we know how to pronounce. Don't know what any of it means. And this is what Plato is talking about through this prophecy, using the allegory of Tammuz and Tot. I'm going to back up a little bit. The specific which you have discovered is an aid not to memory, but to reminiscence. And you give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. What do we say today about the Catholic liturgy in the Middle Ages when nobody spoke Latin anymore? What do we say? They heard a lot. They heard a lot of Latin liturgy. Understood not a word. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality. And what do we say about medieval Catholics today? What do we say? They had the show of wisdom. They appeared wise, but they could do nothing. They could do nothing in the face of the 14th century and all of its challenges. Phaedrus says, yes, Socrates, you can easily invent tales of Egypt or of any other country. Yeah, you can make up a story, Socrates. Remember, earlier he says if a rhetorician makes up a story, an allegory to try to convince you of something, you're the better in the argument if you say, I don't believe you. So what does Phaedrus do? They had that. Socrates demonstrates the thing that he says that he doesn't like, and Phaedrus says, I don't believe you. Call and response. That's how it's supposed to go. When I say this stuff, you're supposed to say, I don't believe you, and go look to see if I'm wrong. Socrates continues, there was a tradition in the temple of Dodona that oaks first gave prophetic utterances. The men of old, unlike in their simplicity to young philosophy, deemed that if they heard the truth, even from rock or oak, it was enough for them. That's a reference to the people that Hesiod is referencing in the Works of Days when he says, it might not be Works and Days, it might be the Theogony, when he says, but what do all of those rocks and oak mean to me? Hesiod is referencing the same people that Plato is talking about. Whereas you seem to consider, says Socrates, not whether a thing is or is not true, but who the speaker is and from what country the tale comes. That is a beautiful retort. He's just primed Phaedrus to, as soon as he tells a story, to try to convince him of an argument, for Phaedrus to say, well, I don't know enough about that to believe you, so I just don't believe you. And then Socrates immediately turns around with, well, the reason you don't believe me is because you're paying attention to the names of the gods in the country that they come from, not the allegory itself. To which Phaedrus says, I acknowledge the justice of your rebuke, and I think that the Theban is right in his view about letters. Socrates says, he would be a very simple person and quite a stranger to the oracles of Tammuz or Ammon, who should leave in writing or receive in writing any art under the idea that the written word would be intelligible or certain, or who deemed that writing was at all better than knowledge and recollection of the same matters. And I agree. Just because you can write a book doesn't mean you understand what you're talking about, because you also wrote down your notes. But to be able to just sit live on YouTube and talk for 10 hours about the things that I've read and the things I've experienced and the things that I've heard and the things I believe and the things that I don't know and the things that I'm trying to understand, yeah, see your professor at college, see your university professor do that. Let's see if they could do that. I'm raising the bar, yo. I'm also hungry. Socrates says, I cannot help feeling, Phaedrus, that writing is unfortunately like painting. For the creations of the painter have the attitude of life, and yet if you ask them a question, they preserve a solemn silence. And the same may be said of speeches. You would imagine that they had intelligence. But if you want to know anything and put a question to one of them, the speaker always gives one unvarying answer. And when they have been once written down, they are tumbled about anywhere among those who may or may not understand them, and know not to whom they should reply, and to whom not. Wait a minute. And know not to whom they should reply, to whom not. And if they are maltreated or abused, they have no parent to protect them, and they cannot protect or defend themselves. I was talking about this morning when it comes to the girls and women that I hear talking to one another about their boyfriends. It's like none of you has a parent to protect you. None of you has a father who loves you. And Phaedrus says, again, that is most true. And Socrates says, but there is another kind of writing, Is there not another kind of word or speech far better than this, and having far greater power? A son of the same family, but lawfully begotten? And Phaedrus says, whom do you mean, and what is his origin? I mean, Socrates says, an intelligent word graven into the soul of the learner, which can defend itself and knows when to speak and when to be silent. And Phaedrus says, you mean the living word of knowledge, which has a soul, and of which the written word is properly no more than an image? And Socrates says, what man of sense would plant seeds in an artificial garden to bring forth fruit or flowers in 8 days, and not in deeper and more fitting soil? Yes, of course that is what I mean. And now may I be allowed to ask you a question? Would a husbandman who is a man of sense take the seeds which he values and which he wishes to bear fruit, and in sober seriousness plant them during the heat of summer in some garden of Adonis, that he may rejoice when he sees them in 8 days appearing in beauty? Let's be careful here. Let's be very clear. Adonis is Adonai. Adonai is one of the Jewish overgods' many names. Adonai, Yahweh, and El, and Baal all competed to be the supreme god of the Jewish hierarchy of concepts at one point in time. Circa 250 BCE, I can promise you that Yahweh was not the chief deity. He was on his way, but he was not there yet. Adonai then. Adonai. What did Socrates just say here? Plant your seeds in the garden of Adonai, and in 8 days see them grown. How long did it take God to make the garden? There's a myth here that we're not allowed to know about. I'll look for it. Gardens of Adonis. There's your Garden of Eden. It's an Indo-European tradition. Has absolutely nothing to do with the Semitic or the Sumerian people. Your Garden of Eden is right there. Garden of Adonis, 8 days to appear in beauty. Come on. At least he would do so, says Socrates, if at all, only for the sake of amusement and pastime. That should be passed with 2 S's. Pastime. It's not a past time. It's a pass time. It's a way to pass time. Baseball being America's favorite pastime means America's favorite way to waste an afternoon. Pastime. But when he is in earnest, he sows, continues Socrates, in fitting soil, and practices husbandry, and is satisfied if in 8 months the seeds which he has sown arrive at perfection. Phaedrus says, yes, Socrates. That will be his way when he is in earnest. He will do the other, as you say, only in play. The prophets are older than Socrates and Plato. And I'm not convinced that the Yahwists didn't come from the same exact location in the world as the pre-Socratics. And the Yahwists were the ones who didn't like the Asherah groves, the oak, the stone, And they're the ones who made Adonai's garden a myth, a metaphor, an allegory. This is interesting. This is very interesting to me. They're agreeing that a serious person only plays at this mythical religion of gardens. That this isn't serious business for a man, especially an intellectual. And I was talking this morning, and I was just sitting in my tent, about something very similar. I was just thinking this morning too, before I did my lives, I was thinking about how I haven't really read anything engaging or difficult, and I haven't come across anything new and interesting that I can chase down. And I really need to invest a few $100s in books about biblical scholarship. Like maybe I need to enrich Bart Ehrman with a few hundred of my dollars. Start there. But the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, has mysteries in it that aren't being explored by biblical scholarship. And so that's a place that I want to be right now in my life, is working on Luke. But I was thinking earlier today about how I haven't read anything engaging or difficult enough to really feel like I have anything really to talk about, other than like circle around the same kind of responsibility, self-management, self-improvement that I always talk about. But the Adonai Adonis connection is one that I need to see what scholarship has to say about that. Because just going, oh yeah, well, they're the same God, they have the same mythologies, they have the same, okay, but they would have had the same worshipers too. So who was actually worshiping them? Because somebody asked me, well, do you worship this or do you worship that God, the other day when I was live and I was doing a Q&A or whatever, I was engaging the crowd. And it's like, well, worship is a word that you don't really understand. Worship used to be professional. Worship used to be professional. So who were Adonai's worshipers? If they were the wives, then Adonai is Asherah's husband. And if Adonai is Asherah's husband, that explains why Yahweh and Asherah are in constant conflict, because Yahweh is an abstraction of the Adonai character away from the strictly human hero that he probably was in deep antiquity. And so that's kind of what they're talking about here, as far as serious people and playful behavior and arriving at perfection. This is going to require me a couple of reads, because there's a lot going on here. The husbandry stuff is old Indo-European. This is going to take me a few reads to really tease out all of it. And so what that means is that I'm going to end up talking about this a lot in the coming weeks. Socrates continues, and can we suppose that he who knows the just and the good and the honorable has less understanding than the husbandman and his own seeds? Phaedrus says, certainly not. A husbandman isn't just green acres, not just a rich guy that's got a handful of seeds. This is where Jack and the Beanstalk comes from, right? This guy, husbandman, has these magic beans, but he's destitute. He needs money. This kid and his dad have money, but they need something to grow. So he buys the beans. But neither the kid nor the father truly believes that the beans are magic. They just know that they're beans. So they plant them. And it turns out they were magic. Like the husbandman said they would be. Jack and his dad are good people. They're good, honorable. They know it's just, right? They know the difference in right and wrong. But they don't know magic beans. This person who's portrayed in the story of Jack and the Beanstalk as unscrupulous for selling these beans sold magic beans. They were actually magic. That's one of the things that always struck me about the telling of that story, is the teachers would always maintain the skeptical of the dad. But the dad's wrong. The dad is objectively wrong. Those are magic fucking beans. And then everything else that takes place is about this. You climb up into the sky. That story is about, whether that author had read this, it's about what Socrates is talking about in this section. And then Socrates continues, then will he not seriously incline to write his thoughts in water with pen and ink, sowing words which can neither speak for themselves nor teach the truth adequately to others? And Phaedrus says, no, that is not likely. And this is why I don't essay. This is why I don't just write and put it on the Patreon for nobody to read. People tell me, well, you should write. You're homeless. You're intelligent. You should write. Okay, well, you should read my stuff specifically and pay me for it. And they go, well, someone else can do that. And I say, well, someone else can write my thoughts too. Someone else can take the time to write down my thoughts, because that, you don't appreciate how much work that is. And Socrates continues, no, that is not likely. In the garden of letters he will sow and plant, but only for the sake of recreation and amusement. I agree with this. Professional authors, even as much as I like him, even as much as I like historians like the guy who's got Tom Holland, the guy who's got Spider-Man's name. As much as I like Tom Holland, he's only doing it for fun. He's only doing it for the money, right? He's only doing it for recreation and amusement. Most writers do it for something to do between paying gigs. It's something to do to generate more income between paying gigs, and he says it right here. In the garden of letters he'll sow and plant, but only for the sake of recreation, not for the sake of his embetterment, not for the sake of the embetterment of others. That book, the subtle art of not giving a fuck, that's not about making you better. It's not about making you better. It's about recreation and amusement of having read a little bit of Buddhism. He's amusing himself with how little his audience, paying audience, actually know about Buddhism. That book made me so fucking angry. He will write them down as memorials to be treasured against the forgetfulness of old age, by himself or by any other old man who is treading the same path. He will rejoice in beholding their tender growth, and while others are refreshing their souls with banqueting and the like, this will be the pastime in which his days are spent. And Phaedrus says, a pastime, Socrates, as noble as the other, is ignoble. The pastime of a man who can be amused by serious talk and can discourse merrily about justice and the like. So spending time alone, writing your thoughts and self-aggrandizing on paper, they're saying, is a significantly less valuable human skill than spending your time talking to other human beings, even about what you would be writing. Socrates agrees. But his serious aim will be to true, Phaedrus, but nobler far is the serious pursuit of the dialectician who, finding a congenial soul by the help of science, sows and plants therein words which are able to help themselves, and him who planted them, and are not unfruitful, but have in them a seed which others brought up in different soils, render immortal, making the possessors of it happy to the utmost extent of human happiness. And now, Phaedrus, having agreed upon the premises, we may decide about the conclusion. About Lysias, whom we censured in his art of writing and his discourses, and the rhetorical skill or want of skill which was shown in them. These are the questions which we sought to determine, and they brought us to this point, and I think that we are now pretty well informed about the nature of art and its opposite. Phaedrus says, yes. What would be the opposite of art? So if we were to think in dyads, dualities, right? There's art and its circle, and then everything outside it. Everything outside that circle that's art is the opposite of art. It's not, it's opposed to art. It's not art. What is it? The word my mother inherited to me is trash, and the word that my father inherited to me for that is garbage. Trash and garbage. Sorry, I got lost in my thoughts there for a second. And I've lost where, there we are. Phaedrus says, yes, I think with you, meaning I think in the same manner or along the same lines that you do. But I wish that you would repeat what was said. And Socrates says, the conclusion. A man must be able to know and define and denote until a man knows the truth of the several particulars of which he is writing or speaking, and is able to define them as they are, and having defined them, again to divide them until they can be no longer divided, and until in like manner he is able to discern the nature of the soul, and discover the different modes of discourse which are adapted to different natures, and to arrange and dispose them in such a way that the simple form of speech may be addressed to the simpler nature, and the complex and composite to the more complex nature. Until he has accomplished all this, he will be unable to handle arguments according to rules of art, as far as their nature allows them to be subjected to art, either for the purpose of teaching or persuading. Such is the view which is implied in the whole preceding argument. That's like when I tested that guy, and I was testing him. I was absolutely testing him. That guy that was, I think his name was like Tactical Tim or something like that. He had tactical or tactic in his name, and so I was teasing him about whether he knew the difference in strategy and tactics, because I didn't, and if he did, that'd be pretty cool. And he was right, that strategy is the war and tactics are the battle. So strategy is how you're going to do the whole system, and tactics are how you're going to do each individual. That's why grand strategy games tend to be like conquer the whole world, and tactical games tend to be level-based. I think that I read that whole paragraph to you. And so we're going to move on to Socrates then says, secondly, as to the censure which was passed on the speaking or writing of discourses, and how they might be rightly or wrongly censured, did not our previous argument show, and Phaedrus interrupts with, show what? Socrates says, the legislator or statesman must know the nature of justice or injustice, good and evil. To Lysias or to any man, ignorance of all these things is a disgrace. Hey, thank you guys for those likes. Likes. All right. So it looks like I don't have any. Looks like I haven't gotten any comments on this one. Interesting. Okay. Sorry. And so Phaedrus asks, show what? And Socrates says, that whether Lysias or any other writer that ever was or will be, whether private man or statesman, proposes laws and so becomes the author of a political treatise, fancying that there is any great certainty and clearness in his performance. The fact of his so writing is only a disgrace to him, whatever men may say. For not to know the nature of justice, I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing because the sun is all the way out today. And injustice and good and evil, and not to be able to distinguish the dream from the reality, cannot in truth be otherwise than disgraceful to him, even though he have the applause of the whole world. And you hear me talk about that all the time. Jordan Peterson is a disgrace to himself, regardless of who applauds to him. Socrates considers, or Socrates continues. But he who thinks that in the written word there is necessarily much which is not serious, and that neither poetry nor prose, spoken or written, is of any great value, if, like the compositions of the rhapsodies, they are only, shoot, I didn't mean to do that. Why did that happen? There we go. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. If, like the compositions of the rhapsodies, they are only recited in order to be believed and not with any view to criticism or instruction, and who thinks that even the best of writings are but a reminiscence of what we know, and that only in principles of justice and goodness and nobility, taught and communicated orally for the sake of instruction and graven in the soul, which is the true way of writing, is their clearness and perfection and seriousness, and that such principles are a man's own and his legitimate offspring, being, in the first place, the word which he finds in his own bosom; secondly, the brethren and descendants and relations of his idea, which have been duly implanted by him in the souls of others, and who cares for them and no others. This is the right sort of man, and you and I, Phaedrus, would pray that we may become like him. My father used to say that a man has only got two things in this world: his name and his word. And if his word ain't shit, his name ain't even as good as mud. So there you go. My dad and Socrates agreeing. Socrates then says, and now the play is played out, and of rhetoric enough. Go and tell Lysias that to the fountain and school of the nymphs we went down, and were bidden by them to convey a message to him and to other composers of speeches. That fountain there, choosing the word fountain there, is interesting because I chose not Shaggy Watering Hole in case people get stupid, but Shaggy Fountain, and I wanted it for the fountain of truth, the fountain of being, right? And then all day today, since I made that choice, all day today, everything that I've been reading and thinking about, talking about, listening to, seeing, is about fountains and springs of knowledge, life, well-being, prosperity, right? Sometimes you have to dig and you have to drill and you have to really fucking work at it in order to find that fountain. But when you do, you send a message to other composers of speeches, to Homer and other writers of poems, whether set to music or not, and to Solon and others who have composed writings in the form of political discourses, which they would term laws. This is so funny. I got into an argument with a guy whose name was Tom Bombadil on Twitter, and he was trying to tell me that Periclean Athens wasn't it wasn't a democracy with a constitution. And I said, well, you might want to tell that to Solon's grave, because he's spinning in it right now. And he goes, well, who's Solon? And I went, the author of the Athenian constitution, you fucking ass. Anyway, so when he says Solon here and others who have composed writings in the form of political discourses, which they would term laws, he's also talking about people like Thomas Jefferson. To all of them, we are to say that if their compositions are based on knowledge of the truth, and they can defend or prove them, when they are put to the test by spoken arguments which leave their writings poor in comparison of them, then they are to be called not only poets, orators, legislators, but are worthy of a higher name, befitting the serious pursuit of their title. And this is why the United States government requires that you write the bill and then argue it orally. This is why 2008 was a fucking shit show, because all of our legislation, and actually, let's not even use 2008. Let's use the fucking universal health care that Obama and Hillary Clinton put together. It was something stupid like 1,200 pages, and no one had read all of them. No one person in our government had read all of them. And they voted for it. Nobody could argue it on the Senate floor, but they had to vote for it because Democrats are fucking stupid. And they'll riot. Democrats will riot. So they had to. They had to pass it. they finally got 1,200 pages of legislature together, they had to pass it. They had no choice. Democrats will riot. And they'll grow up and vote Republican. So you have to get it. You have to get legislature passed as a Democrat while they're young, because they're going to vote Republican once they mature intellectually. And so long as you continue to pass legislature, they don't have to mature intellectually. And so Phaedrus wants to know what name he would assign to these people. And Socrates says, wise I may not call them, for that is a great name which belongs to God alone. Lovers of wisdom, or philosophers, is their modest and befitting title. Phaedrus says, okay, very suitable. And Socrates continues, he cannot rise above his own compilations and compositions, which he has been long patching and piecing, adding adding some and taking away some, may be justly called poet or speechmaker or lawmaker or novelist. Certainly. Give this as our message to Lysias. Now go and tell this to your companion. And Phaedrus says, but there is also a friend of yours who ought not to be forgotten. And Socrates says, well, who is he? And Phaedrus says, I, Socrates, the fair. What message will you send to him? And how shall we describe him? And Socrates says, another message to his Socrates. Socrates is still young, Phaedrus, but I am willing to hazard a prophecy concerning him. I think that he has a genius which soars above the orations of Lysias, and that his character is cast in a finer mold. My impression of him is that he will marvelously improve as he grows older, and that all former rhetoricians will be as children in comparison of him. And I believe that he will not be satisfied with rhetoric, but that there is in him a divine inspiration which will lead him to things higher still. For he has an element of philosophy in his nature. This is the message of the gods dwelling in this place, which I will myself deliver to Isocrates, who is my delight, and do you give the other to Lysias, who is yours. Phaedrus says, I will, and now as the heat is abated, let us depart. Socrates says, should we not offer up a prayer first of all to the local deities? By all means. And then Socrates offers that prayer. Beloved Pan and all ye other gods who haunt this place, give me beauty in the inward soul, and may the outward and inward man be at one. May I reckon the wise to be the wealthy, and may I have such a quantity of gold as a temperate man, and he only, can bear and carry. Anything more, the prayer, I think, is enough for me. And Phaedrus says, ask the same for me, for friends should have all things in common. And Socrates says, let us go. The prayer, the asking, that's enough. The asking you to watch, the you showing up to watch, the likes, the consideration in your heart that I might be worth $1 someday. Those are all I ask for. Those are enough. There's always more money that we could make, right? But I would consider true wealth a simple woman who just wants kisses and enough money to take her out. I always feel a sense of melancholy when a book is over, because the only thing to do now is read it again or read something else, which is where anthologies like this one or the Bible have gotten their historical power. Because it's like, Socrates has left me. That book is over. And then as I did, you turn a page and, oh wait, there's more Socrates. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. And starting the Bible back over from the beginning doesn't feel like you're doing it again. Right? So like we did this last night. We've done this over the course of the last 6 weeks. Right? We played Final Fantasy, learned it, played it, beat it, and then we switched to Final Fantasy 2. But in the scope of things, the Final Fantasy remastered anthology, the 1 through 6, is an anthology. And so beating 1 again was like, okay, but we're doing it again. But then you play 2, and it's like, okay. And then you beat 2 and you play 3, and you beat 3 and you play 4, and then you beat 4 and you play 5, and then you beat 5 and you play 6. And it's like, well, if I go back and play 1, I have a whole new appreciation for it now. So it's like playing it for the first time all over again. Star Wars offers that. There's a lot that offers that. I don't think I'm there, but that's what I'm aiming at for my work. Where like if you were to sit and watch any one of these lives, I can't imagine it would be compelling to turn around and do it again, but you'll know there will be another one, maybe even as many as 4 or 5 tomorrow. And then in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, when you revisit it, you'll remember where you were when you were hearing it. At least that's the experience I have. That's my experience. Maybe it's not your experience. Thank you for all those likes. Hello, I see you just scrolled in. I'm done actually reading the Phaedrus, so I'm just kind of doing closing comments and just sort of thinking about my day as I head to the next thing, because it's almost 6 o'clock and I got to start charging my phone again to be ready to be at the tent at 8. So my time management hasn't sucked as bad today as it has in the recent past, and that's pretty cool. Hungry. So thanks for being here. Thanks for checking me out, future audience. Thanks for swinging back around. Thanks for making it this far in the video. That's very cool of you. And I would love to know, obviously I just would love to know your experience of my work. That'd be very cool.